These boys talked to me in May at St Ignatius College just outside Salisbury. 4 of them are now behind bars. Last month, the school was raided twice. The police came with guns, dogs and tear gas. 23 arrests were made. The police were stoned, a Land Rover was turned over. Today, 18 days after their arrest, no charges have been made against the 4 boys still in custody.
Now we're going to divide a minus 3 into 2a to the power 4 minus 5a cubed minus 10a plus 3. Would you do it for me, please, Wanda?
St Ignatius College is a secondary school founded by the Jesuits 9 years ago. These boys are aged between 15 and 19. They're among the elite of Rhodesia's young Africans, for only 180 black children reach the 6th form in any year, 1 in every 600.
Or you could say 3 and 5, 14 1.
The scarcity of secondary education, the lack of political opportunity, the difficulty they'll face in getting a job, all these lie at the root of the young Africans' frustration. The school's principal, Father Davis.
The difficulty is the kind of law that we're getting now, like the Land Tenure Act and the Housing Act, and which is leading in only one direction, to my mind.
And what is that direction?
Well, it's leading to a sort of segregation of 2 races instead of making one country.
Apartheid in the South African mould?
I'm not quite sure whether I would go as far as to say that. I'm not quite sure whether I would understand, because I don't know anything much about South Africa, strangely enough. But certainly 2 distinct races. That's what it seems to be aiming at and going towards.
And how do you feel about that?
Oh, I think it's a bad thing. This is one country. It should be a great country. And merit should be the reason why people go ahead and so on. Merit only.
How do you feel when you see a 16-year-old African, well-educated, bright, leaving school and unable to get a job?
He's fed up, all right to say, on a television interview. Yes, very much so.
If a black child and a white child emerged from school with similar qualifications, which would find it the most easy to get a job?
Certainly the white man. And to prove that, some gentlemen from Salisbury, who are obviously supporters of the Smith government, came here and we asked them the same question. Why that white men find it easier to find jobs. And obviously they said, just imagine if you had a brother and you were the manager of some company. If your brother and somebody else came, which one would you pick? And obviously the answer was my brother.
Things are quite bad at the country in the moment, but I think there's a growing tendency among the white children of our age to realize the hardships the African is facing. And I think this is also the case in South Africa. You've only got to consider what's been happening at the South African universities and to realize that the younger generation at any rate is realizing what the African has to put up to. And even though they can't do much about it, they're trying their hardest. Well, I'm speaking from experience because I've had the opportunity to learn with white boys, and admittedly they tended to come from the upper class, but I think they were fairly representative of the young white children in the country. It's only the parents, and this gap between parents and children is widening, but the young white kids are, are trying their hardest anyway to try and lessen the gap.
Do you see hope in this situation?
Yes, I think it's a hopeful sign. I mean, in terms of years, I don't think we can say that conditions will change in 5 years, but I think gradually the voice of the present generation anyway will not be neglected.
Is there ever going to be black majority rule in this country? In a way then, it's in the Europeans' best interests not to educate the African.
That's quite true.
One thing that must be made clear to the British government is that African people in this country are not at all worried about what political ideology they follow. If communism is going to bring them freedom, they will accept that ideology. And for that matter, I can assure you that Western democracy and civilization is really losing popularity in the country.
This, of course, might be turned
So
by...
if the British government and the British people still want some friendship with the with the African people in this country, they must see that they satisfy him by helping to give him freedom. They must force the Smith government.
This, of course, might be said by Mr. Smith to be complete justification for keeping the African nationalists behind bars.
What cause?
What you've just said.
And it is only the only way possible now for us to gain freedom, because all the other ways have failed. Talks have failed. You can't reason with the Smith government.
Is that
they just don't accept to reason. They don't. So why are we going to waste our time talking with them if they want to talk with us?
Does anybody speak for you?
Not really, no.
The Africans' political representation is a curious mixture of ancient and modern. In Rhodesia's upper house, the Senate, sit the chiefs elected by a majority of the tribal elders. They're paid an allowance in order, as the government says, to enhance their prestige in the eyes of their people. In the lower house, 16 of the 66 MPs are elected by the black vote. 8 of them are chosen by these same tribal elders. The other 8 are the only ones directly elected by the registered African vote, which, in a population of 6 million, numbers 8,326. This is a young country to which the white man came only 120 years ago. Today, the white man is outnumbered 20-1 by the black. But the political power is his, because the Rhodesian doctrine is that the reins of government must remain in what Mr. Smith describes as civilized hands. It's this insistence that makes a settlement impossible, while the British government stands firm on the 5 principles. In the meantime, the young white Rhodesian is aware of his privileged position, the ease with which he'll get a job, for instance, compared with a black school leaver. What do you want to be?
Myself? That's the million-dollar question, Ray. At the moment, I'm working in a bank. I suppose I want to do something in commerce or industry, on the managerial side.
Did you find it difficult to get a job?
Oh, no. No, I've had 6 jobs in no time. No, not difficult at all.
What do you think about the situation where the African school leaver, in many cases the African graduate, finds it difficult to get a job?
Yes, I think this is true. I think there should be a lot more done for the African, from the point of view of jobs, providing for jobs, because there's a lot more of them than Europeans, and comparatively there aren't as many jobs being provided for them. This is something which I suppose will take time. You know, you can't do this overnight, but nonetheless it's something that should be worked on, you know.
Well, I'm afraid this is one of our biggest problems, because there are so many millions of Africans going through school, and the problem arises where you get an educated African coming out of, say, high school with good O-levels, and there are no jobs for him. I mean, there's so many of them that, you know, right now there's not much we can do about it.
And yet, you see, you talk to many adults, and they would deny
Yes.
that this is the situation.
Well, this is only my personal opinion, but I've seen, you know, garden boys with O-level, this sort of thing. It's really sad.
What do you think's happening to this country today?
It's fluctuating terribly, I think. I think there's tending to be a slight repression, very slight, and the hope is that this tendency doesn't increase. But there are others who think exactly the opposite, of course. But if you ask me where I'm going to use my vote, this is the way I'll put it. To stop this. And I certainly agree with my friend up there that this business of having equal rights for equal qualifications is certainly something we must try and get.
Quite often at school we have discussion groups about this subject. I think, like he says, it helps us, makes us more broad-minded.
Are you critical of the government?
Sometimes, if we have to be.
But broadly speaking, do you think that the government represents the points of view of most of you and your friends?
I think so, yes.
The friend beside you is smiling.
I think generally that the country's doing well. If an African government had to take over, it would just go rock bottom, hit the bottom. I think it would.
Well, Zambia's dropped down because, after all, there was a European government there. And suddenly when the Africans came in, they tried to kick out all the Europeans. And now look at the country now. Sanctions are backfiring onto them.
I think, you know, Rhodesia is going very well at the moment. I think sanctions have done us, you know, quite a lot of good. Much to the chagrin of the British government. And, you know, I would certainly not give any quarter, you know, concerning majority rule.
You don't think there should be majority rule?
Well, I think at the moment, no.
Is there anything that you would try to explain to a British politician about your country which you don't think he understands?
Yes, certainly. I think the relationship between the black-white, you know, they oversee us as the cruel tormentors of the poor African, you know, whereas this is not the case at all. We get along very well with the Africans, you know. We both try to help each other, you know, and we mutually understand one another. They're just two totally different ways of life. And this cannot be bridged, you know, in a few generations.
But there are, obviously, as you yourself have said, inequalities of
yes,
opportunity.
There definitely are inequalities of opportunity, and I think this should be rectified if possible.
And what about the policy of separate development, which is the declared policy of the government?
Well, the policy of separate development takes in, you know, the fact that there are differences among the blacks and whites. I mean, the blacks themselves support separate development. I think there should be separate development, but there ought to be, at the same time, opportunities for Africans to make their way, you know, and to do well.
Certainly, the pattern of life of many Africans in Rhodesia has changed little over the centuries. Perhaps 3 million blacks live in the tribal trust lands, areas traditionally theirs. For many Africans, to talk of a concept of Western democracy is meaningless. Far more important is the day-to-day struggle for an adequate living. On a practical level, the government are spending thousands of pounds on teaching them modern farming methods. Their Africans, they say, are better off, more literate than in any other part of the continent, except South Africa.
The ingredients are 1 part soybean meal to 1 part maize meal.
And if in this government-sponsored cooking class the terminology is Western, with talk of spoonsful, pounds and ounces, it only underlines the final irony of the situation. Because the more the African becomes educated to Western ways and values, the more he will covet the standard of living and the political freedom that his European neighbour enjoys. The most crucial statistic in Rhodesia today is that the black population will double in the next 18 years. A few black Africans have fine homes like these on the outskirts of Salisbury. As the population grows, so too will the ambitions of the black majority. The legislation aimed at keeping the races apart is now being felt in the schools. Athletics, like most adult sport in Rhodesia, is multiracial. Rhodesia's Athlete of the Year last year was a black sprinter. But in government-run state schools, all team games are segregated, which sets a problem for the many independent private schools. What do you feel about this situation where private schools have to take Africans out of their team if they're playing against a government school?
I think that depends on the school. We just don't play as school if we cannot play on their field. They come to us or they refuse to play with us. We refuse to play with them if they say we have to take any of our coloureds, Chinese or African out.
So if there's any segregation, in fact, you refuse to play them?
Yes.
Do you think there's freedom of speech in this country?
No, definitely not. I think the minute you say something, it goes back and goes back. I know my parents are terrified something's going to happen when I start talking, because they're civil servants and I usually put my foot in it.
Have you had any evidence of anything which you've said going back, as you put it?
Yes, well, it's been thrown in my parents' face and they've told me to be quiet. I think it's mainly when I start criticising the apartheid principles that occur.
With black African friends, we've got a few in our class, but it's very difficult to communicate with them. They seem to close up any time you try to talk to them, and we do go out of our way to make them feel at home, but I think so many of them have been rebuffed by other whites that they feel that they can't speak to anybody else. They don't seem to realise that not everybody's the same. We've all got different opinions.
If you had a black African friend, would you take him home?
Well, I wouldn't mind it, no.
No, I think this is very frowned upon. I had a friend who felt very sort of friendly with Africans, and he once came into our home and he sort of shook hands with my houseboy, you know, sort of speaking to him. And my mother sort of said, look, what's he trying to do, you know? Why is he trying to go to extremes about things? I think it is fairly well frowned upon. But I must say that I do know one African who I probably respect more than any other person I know.
Why?
Because he's an intelligent person and his mind is developed. When I speak to him, I speak to an intelligent person, not to an African.
To an equal?
To an equal, yes. But this is, you know, few and far between.
Can I ask you how you think your parents have handled the building of this country? I mean, are you critical at all of what your parents, the people in power, have done, let's say, during the last 20 years?
No, I think they've done a very good job when you consider the age of the country compared with, say, the United States, which has racial problems far worse than ours.
Can I ask whether you believe in equal rights?
Yes.
Yes, I do. Yes, if everyone's equally educated.
Yes, I do.
Yes, I think I do.
Yes.
Do you believe in one man, one vote?
Yes, if the people are educated at the same level. At the moment, I don't, because you find that as far as education is concerned, the whites are in the majority, and one can't give the vote to uneducated people that they can't use their judgment, they can't assess the situation correctly.
But how can you say that when you also believe in equal rights?
I do believe in equal rights, but do you think rights are equal if you've spent 12 years at school being taught cultural things, science, the arts, and someone comes straight out of a hut in the bush? Do you think he deserves the same rights as you? If he had been educated on the same standard, fair enough.
But then he should have equal educational rights as well, shouldn't he? To enable him to come out of that hut in the bush with a parallel education to yours.
Let me say it, the Europeans have brought this country to what stage it is at the moment. So surely the Europeans should be educated, since they are the ones that have come and brought the education, since it's their educational system. The African is at the same, some of them are at the same stage now that they might have been several hundred years ago.
The black population in Rhodesia is growing faster than almost anywhere else in the world. Are you worried yourself by the fact that in the next 18 years or so the African population is going to double?
Well, it's something to think about. I wouldn't say I'm worried about it. You know, people also say might be a nuclear war, be wiped out, but I don't worry about it. It's just something which you think about from time to time.
Tonight, 4 black schoolboys are spending their 19th night in prison without a charge.
Since Emmerson Mnangagwa took over as Zimbabwe's first citizen, he has been trying to unite the country. Today's meeting with the white community is part of the campaign to attract investors. The country is facing economic challenges.
Every single Zimbabwean who is in the country, every single Zimbabwean who is in diaspora should be patriotic about his or her country. People have gone out for various reasons, Some went out because there was no employment in the country. Some went out because the quality of skills they have could not be accommodated in this country. Some went out because they had committed the crime. But all are Zimbabweans. So when each time I go out, I meet our people in the diaspora. I urge them to come back home and make their contribution at home.
Munangagwa has maintained that the land policy will not change, but encourage them to work with government.
We should cease to talk about who owns the farm in terms of color. We should cease talking about that. A farmer, a black farmer, a white farmer is a Zimbabwean farmer. We should look at that way. We should begin to develop a culture among our people to accept ourselves together that we are one. Let the past remain behind. There are so many white farmers who don't have farms anymore as a result of the land reform. But I think they have a role to play in terms of skills in the farming sector for productivity.
And those who attended had this to say.
People are happy, and this is a first for a president in Zimbabwe to speak to whites like this and the minorities.
I thought it was excellent. I thought it was very encouraging, and I am a total supporter of his new road forward, leaving the past behind, forward ever, backward never. One people, one nation.
I think everybody's feeling good. He's created that conducive environment for everyone, and everybody here was eager to meet with the president, and is now actually reiterated that there is no divisions. We need to be peaceful. We need to unite. No talking of color, no talking of a different race, no talking of names like minority. This is all dead and buried. Let's all hope and wish for the future and all see the vision that he has.
He believes the problems of Zimbabwe can be resolved. Sophie Mkwena, SABC News.